What's up, guys? Want to talk today about the UFC top 10 and how the guys in the top 10 in every weight class in the UFC, it's like a completely different organization than the rest of the UFC. The top 10 guys are. It's literally like fighting in a different organization. That is the level difference of these guys versus the rest of the UFC. And obviously I found that out the hard way, but I found it out for sure. There's a few reasons for that, I think, and I'll explain those. But one of the main reasons I feel like the UFC top 10 is different than the rest of the UFC, it's not even close, is those guys in the top 10 are also mostly the guys that have been training their whole life. That was the hardest part for me coming up. My first nine, I was 9-1 in my first 10 fights in the UFC, which was like crazy. At the time, I think only two other guys that ever did that in history. One of them was Conor McGregor, and I forgot who the other one was. But being 9-1 in your first 10 fights is like fucking phenomenal, right? And then I get to these top 10 guys, and it was like a completely different organization. These guys, two things. They're usually the guys that have been training the longest. They have the most experience in training, and they're also the best athletes. They're way more athletic than the rest of the UFC, and they're also a lot more experienced than the rest of the UFC. A lot of guys that come into the UFC that are just journeymen that go 2-2 and get cut, or 3-3 and just don't have a long career in the UFC. They are guys that started later in life, or they are guys that just aren't as athletic. And for me, I started later in life, and I definitely don't feel like I'm that athletic either. I feel like being tall is what made me who I was, for sure. Like it definitely helped me, and I had phenomenal cardio. I worked very hard, and I feel like I had better cardio than everyone I fought and everyone I trained with for the most part. And part of that was because I had no life, I had no other interest. I was just obsessed with fighting, and I would train like 5 hours a day outside of training camps. And all of that's not hard. Some of that is drilling and slow technique, but just the amount of effort I put in such a short time period helped me catch up to these guys that have been training their whole lives. But that was the hardest part, trying to beat these guys that have been training their whole life. And when you get in the top 10, you get guys like Gaethje, who I fought. You get guys like Poirier. You get guys, these are just guys in my weight class, but you get even other weight classes. You get like Tyrone Woodley when he was in the UFC, was the champion. You get these guys that not only have they been training their whole life, but they're also the most athletic. They're fast twitch, they're stronger, they're faster, and they have years of world-class technique in wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, whatever it is. They have years of doing this stuff, and that was the hardest part. I didn't start training until I was 20 years old. I was 20 years old before the first time I ever started boxing, and I was 22 before I ever grappled. And I was in the UFC by the time I was 24 and a half. So 4.5 years plus 2 surgeries during that time period, I was already in the UFC. So stuff happened really quickly. And I'm not delusional about, where I was at and what got me there. 100% being tall definitely helped me like a lot. I was the tallest guy in the world in my weight class, and that really helped me a ton. And I needed that because I was starting 10, 15 years behind people. But these top 10 guys, they're different guys. They're the most athletic, and they're also the guys that have been training the longest. And a lot of them tend to be tougher too. I don't want to say they're tougher than the rest of the UFC, because there's plenty of guys that are super tough that just don't make it because they don't have the skills, they're not athletic enough, or they don't have the technique, and they haven't been training that long. So I think being tough is like something you have to have in the UFC to get to the UFC, unless there's a lot of guys that aren't super tough though that have been training their whole life, unless you've been training your whole life. But that's the main difference I see in the top 10 guys and the rest of the organization, is the level of athleticism plus the level of years of technique, where they're the guys that have been training their whole life. Like you take like, look at Conor McGregor. He comes in, he's super athletic, super fast twitch, and he also was what was an amateur boxer. He had like 60 amateur boxing fights. Like MMA fighter coming into boxing coming into MMA with 60 amateur boxing fights. That was a lot of experience. And you got guys, all of these D1 college wrestlers coming in, Gaethje, Tyrone Woodley, Chandler. These guys are freak athletes that also have years and years of technique. And it's so hard to catch these guys because even if you decide to put that effort out, you're going to have zero life. Like some of these other guys, they can have a personal life even in their 20s because they've been training since they were 5 or 10 years old. And when you're coming in late, it's very hard to do. So that's what I consider the reason why these top 10 guys are just different. They tend to be the most athletic, and they tend to also be the ones that train the longest. But it's like light years apart. Like it's the different level of the top 10 guys versus the rest of the organization. Is light years apart. Like I said, I'd started 9-1 in my first 10 fights, and the majority of those 9 wins I won relatively easily. I mean, it's not like I didn't finish everyone or kill everyone, but I didn't really I only had a couple hard fights in those 9 fights that I won, and the rest of them I won pretty easily. But when I got into the top 10 guys, it was like a different organization, and just the years of training they have and the level of athleticism they have, for sure. So just figured I'd make a video about that. I've been watching a lot of fights recently and seeing these guys that are coming up that are at the top, and they are so good. It's crazy how good they are. If you got any other subjects you'd like me to go over, just let me know. If you're new to martial arts and you're looking for a gym near you, get my book, The Ultimate Guide to Choosing Your Martial Arts School and Instructor. The link is in the description below. Very affordable, $4.99 on Amazon. Good guide to finding a gym near you. All right, guys. Thank you.